All right, we're here with Bill Armstrong, and we interviewed Bill about 6 years ago, and we're going to get kind of an update on what he's been up to, and specifically about this project he's worked with the Vatican, and then talk about what he's been doing more recently, wrapping up projects, and then thoughts on those projects and what he's going to do moving forward. So, Bill, I'll turn it over to you, and if you want to share your screen and get us into the video you mentioned, and then we'll just start talking about the Vatican.
So, hi, Mike. It's great to see you again. Starting to actually feel like I know you, although your hair is much longer than it was in the video that we did some 6 years ago, which I just looked at, and it wasn't. I didn't think it was too bad. Anyway, I'm very grateful and thankful that you've invited me to come back and do some more video together. And I wanted to just start off kind of with a bang, in a way, of showing a video of this project I had the opportunity to do in the Sistine Chapel. And then maybe I'll go back a little bit and explain, what that was and how it happened.
Entrare nella Cappella Sistina, da soli. È l'emozione concessa a Bill Armstrong, celebre fotografo americano. Una sfida che va oltre il confronto, che richiede coraggio, audacia, capacità di vedere oltre il tempo, di ipotizzare nuovi spazi. Bill Armstrong scatta. La volta della Sistina, il giudizio universale, gli affreschi del Quattrocento. Sono fotografie sfocate che rendono evanescenti, fantasmi inafferrabili, le immagini concepite dai grandi maestri del Rinascimento. Da quella prima impronta l'artista seleziona una singola forma e la inserisce in uno spazio fluido dominato da colori brillanti e a contrasto. Quelle figure, una volta parte di un tessuto narrativo, sono ora sospese nel vuoto e forse si affacciano a una nuova vita. Sono umane nella loro fragilità, potenti nella loro solitudine. Bill Armstrong sembra suggerire che la temporalità è complessa, aperta, priva di confini. Le sue foto indicano un confronto tra il tempo di allora e quello di ora, tra gesti antichi ed eventi presenti. L'arte ci chiama, ci coinvolge e ci mette al lavoro.
So, so that was incredible. I think that'll always be like the high point in my life. I was able to work in the Sistine Chapel for 3 nights by myself with an assistant and, the occasional group of private tours that might come through. But, it was incredible. And, we were there for hours. It was really something. So the way this all came about was that the curator of contemporary art in the Vatican, of which there is one, Nicole Forti, had this idea of doing something with photography, and she invited 9 photographers who are all very different from each other to come, and she gave each person some area of the Vatican to be assigned to work in. And Martin Parr was one of them, and he did his usual thing, these kind of satirical pictures of the tourists, a lot of pictures of people taking pictures with their iPhones, and pretty cool, funny, cool stuff, witty photography. Noriko Kawauchi did her little, still lives of corners and things, and Mimo Yodachi did something with sculptures. And anyway, so there was an And there was an architectural photographer who did this sort of standard, more standard architectural views. So anyway, that was, and this was over a long period of time. I mean, each person was there by themselves doing their thing. And I had some work in a gallery in Milan, Renaissance images that look quite similar to the ones that we just saw there. And so the Alessandra Mauro was invited to be one of the co-curator of this show in the Vatican, and she knew my work, and she knew it really, you know, was kind of an obvious fit. So that was just a real piece of luck that I had this opportunity. And then last year, somehow someone came up with the idea of having a 50th anniversary celebration of 58 years of the contemporary collection. And the Pope came to the meeting in the Sistine Chapel. There were 200 artists invited, and all of us who were in the project were invited. So that was like a really real honor. And I can go back and I can share screen again of a glimpse of that, if that's okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Benvenuti, qui tutto è arte, lì voi tutti.
The words of Pope Francis here at this meeting of artists marking the 50th anniversary of the inauguration of the collection of modern art and contemporary art of the Vatican museums. There are about 200 of the most distinguished contemporary artists here.
So that was that. And,
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Yeah, if you could talk more about just how that whole process went with the meeting the Pope, and just how did they get the 200 artists to come together in that one moment, I guess?
well, I don't, so they invited 200 people. The person who organized this, on the Pope's end, was a poet, and he invited a bunch of writers and poets to come as well as artists. I suspect that the RSVP was pretty much unanimously, yes, I'm coming. So, you know, I don't know. I don't think it was that hard to get everybody to come.
Right.
So I was the only, they were all, I mean, the only thing that was kind of too bad, a shame about it was that we didn't have name tags. I mean, Anselm Kiefer was there, and, you know, Andre Serrano, and, you know, a lot of really heavyweight artists, but I didn't get to meet them because I didn't know who anybody was, you know. So, but it was very cool. And one of the things that happened that is written, it's in the article in the Times about it, about how it seems the Pope gave a thumbs up to Andre Serrano, which was pretty interesting and, you know, somewhat controversial.
Yeah, I mean, his work is complex, but in the end, I think if you think through it theologically, or, you know, just the way the art is produced, it's, in my mind, I've always enjoyed his work, and it's never been as controversial as what people want to make it out to be. But I'm sure might get some pushback on that. But moving on, so yeah, so what culminated from the initial project with the photographers? Like this, you said there were 6 of you that did this project, and then so what happened with the work once you had it produced? And
oh, so there were nine photographers, and there was a shot. It's too bad I can't really do share screen and talk at the same time. I guess but there was a show in the Palazzo Reale, the Royal Palace in Milan, in 2018 of the 9 artists, and that was the darkened image of my work with the spotlight on it, which looked fabulous. So that was the main thing that happened.
yeah, if you have an image of that, you can pull it up and then talk about it at the same time.
Let me go back to share. Let me go back to share screen, and I'll bring that up if I can here. So this was, I mean, this was just a fantastic piece of luck for me because the curator, Alessandro Mauro, I think, decided to do the whole show. And you can see there's furniture in these rooms. This is like in the palace, which is a museum, but it's still kind of like a palace. And so she decided to do these spotlights and darkened rooms. And, you know, everybody else's work looked fine that way, but mine looked so much better than it ever had looked before that, you know, it was really pretty thrilling. So I don't have images of the other artists, but each person had their own room because the way, again, this is a palace, so it has pretty small rooms as a museum, as not like a normal museum, and each person had their own room. And that was in 2018. And that was the main event. But the other thing that happened was that three of us are now on view in the permanent collection. There's a bunch of rooms in the Vatican which have, you know, they have Chagall and, you know, all earlier stuff. It's all something to do with spirituality, but it's all, I mean, they have Francis Bacon, believe it or not. They have a lot of, you know, 5 or 6 rooms or maybe more of art. And at the end, my grid ended up on the wall. And this is the stairway to the Sistine Chapel. So this is like, you know, really crazy for me. So Rinko and Mimo Yodici also were they're like in the room before this one, or 2 rooms before. But the others aren't somehow part of the permanent collection at this point, but that could all, you know, switch out. So when I was there last year for the celebration, when I met the Pope, my girlfriend, Mary Ellen Bartley, was taking pictures of me. And even though this is the most fabulous place you'd ever want to have your work, in a way, it's like I saw 200 people go by it, and not one of them looked at this because they're all heading to the staircase to see the real thing. But these are all from Michelangelo. It's like a little mini Last Judgment where they're kind of ascending, limbo, and falling. And that was the whole plan, that I shot all the images, and then I subjected them to my process and came up with this grid.
Yeah, no, I mean, this looks great. The previous installation, you know, I know what you mean, because it looks like they're almost like illuminated from behind, just the way that room is kind of so, you know, dark. And then you have the spotlight, like you said, it almost looks like they're light boxes to some degree.
It looked really cool, I gotta say.
Yeah, yeah, even from the photograph, it looks really cool. But yeah, having your work in the Vatican right before you walk in to see the Sistine Chapel, I mean, that's pretty amazing.
It's crazy because, I mean, you know, what Nicole Forti, the curator, she said I'm a celebrated American photographer. Well, I'm not really that well known. I mean, this is way beyond my pay scale to be to be next to the Sistine Chapel, you know. Anyway, here.
But so
Go off to share here then. Okay.
So yeah, I just think that's amazing. Like so with the contemporary collection at the Sistine Chapel or at the Vatican, I'm sure they take the same approach, as like, this is objectively what's popular or what is the current mood of contemporary art, and that's why they collect the way they collect. I'm sure it probably always has some kind of spiritual perspective on it for the most part, but you know, I haven't really dove into the Vatican's contemporary art collection, but I'm sure they take it very seriously. And you got to take all contemporary art seriously when you approach it that way. So you can't just have kind of an agenda or try to pick artists that are going to fit your kind of you know, your agenda. So I'm glad they take that approach, that they're trying to look at the state of the art and not be as agenda driven. So it's nice that they are that open to the, you know, because there's a lot of pushback with the Catholic tradition and contemporary artworks, and just the way that, you know, there's this idea that a lot of it's just postmodern and just this is there's some corruption with postmodernism, but I've never felt that way growing up. I'm a Christian myself, so I don't subscribe to that as a contemporary art lover. So yeah, I'm glad to see that the Catholic Church is that open to contemporary art and have the right people in administration that'll take it that seriously.
Well, if I can pause for a second, I'm gonna go get the book just came out
Okay.
about election, so 1 second.
Yeah.
So the whole gambit was, the project was, can you see it on screen? Is that this meeting with the Pope was to celebrate the 50th anniversary of when the Contemporary collection was inaugurated, 50 years ago. So that was the idea. So this book is available in the Vatican bookstore, and if you wanted to know what the Vatican Contemporary Collection is, this is, it's here. So it's, you have a budget of $60 or whatever it is. So there is a, and this is brand new, it just came out. So this is, this is different. There wasn't really a way before to understand what this collection was, without, it wasn't like on a website or anything.
Right.
So the other thing is interesting is that just last week, the Pope had another meeting like this. He invited comedians. And
right, I saw that, yeah.
Whoopi Goldberg and Stephen Colbert and all these comedians came in, and he had a really beautiful speech. Very beautiful speech about how he wanted the church to forge a connection with artists that had been lost over the the evolution of contemporary art is pretty far away from Catholicism in some sense. So the Pope's really interested in rebuilding the connection between art and the church that there was in the Renaissance, and apparently with comedians as well. So obviously Pope Francis is he's very different than any prior popes. So
yeah, I mean, he gets knocked around a bit for the way he approaches things, but he is genuinely, he sticks to the Catholic traditions as far as I understand them. I mean, he tries to, I think, push the line a little bit, but to me, I never see it kind of completely breaking. It's just like, how open can the church be to engage culture and the community? So that's, I think, a good thing. A lot, we all need to be connected to the church, so that's a net positive as far as I see. But if you want to move on, so that project is amazing. I'll definitely end up getting the book and then talking to colleagues about that. And we talked about hopefully getting you out here for a conference. But that aside, like, what have you been doing, lately, as far as, working with the projects that you've done in the past, and like, where is all that going also?
Well, I revisited the interview we did in 2018, I guess, this morning. And one thing that I thought was interesting is that we were having a discussion about how, there was still some value to film and versus digital and all that. And I think that's kind of like by the boards now. I don't think it's really much of a discussion left to be had. Although I just was at the lab was prints my large mural prints, LTI, and they said they're still doing a lot of fashion work with using people are coming in with film and they're processing it. But then they scan it; they don't print analog. But for me, working with Blur, there was a lot of difficulty with banding and posterization. That with chemistry, the transition between the colors is very smooth and sort of infinitely, fine, which is part of one of the reasons I call my series the Infinity series. And so I stayed in analog for a long time, but then they closed the darkroom at the International Center of Photography, where I did all my teaching and printing, like 5 or 6 years ago. soon after our last interview. So now I'm working exclusively digitally, and just, you know, the technology has gotten so much better that now I'm able to print pretty successfully. And my main strategy is finding techniques to minimize banding and posterization. And you can see, I just got this 24-inch printer. It's kind of ridiculous that the prints are only like this wide, why it needs all that bulk and size, but that one's much smaller than the Epson, which wouldn't fit in my office studio at all. So that's why I switched over to Canon for that reason. So now I'm working on getting that thing going, and that's a bear. So that's my very current project. But anyway, right after the interview, soon after the interview we did in 2018, I worked on a project called Falling Through History, which it was a kind of a major project. There's 5 grids of 9 and 45 images on my website, and I'd be happy to show those and talk a bit about that if you want.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Falling Through History, so I took images from the history of art of figures that were falling, and I took a picture of them and then printed it out, or I took it from the internet, or some from books, but mostly from the internet. And then I would print it out black and white, and then I'd paint it and put it on a background. And then this time, rather than blurring, I moved the camera as I'm shooting, which is kind of simulating the idea that there's motion. And it's like, again, another kind of backwards process, is because the way that most photographers do motion blur is that they hold the camera steady and they have a long shutter speed, and then the person going by is moving, and so you get the sense of motion that looks like this. But it's I do it the opposite way. The image is stationary, but I move the camera so that you know, you get the sense of motion. And that's actually I have they're from all different periods. This one's from the 10th century. This one's from Robert Doisneau, a photograph. And this is Aaron Siskin from the Pleasures and Terrors of Levitation series. So what was I going to say? Sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. Anyway, I'll go on to another grid. Maybe that'll inspire me. So this is Fall of Icarus. There's, you know, a lot of them from, and there's Robert Capa. So they're kind of, you know, like all over, but just trying to emphasize by the volume of imagery that this idea of falling is a specific thing that really exists in art history. And so I was trying to like kind of connect this kind of psychology of falling through the course of history by doing this project. And then in the Vatican video, she mentioned, Nicole Forti, the curator, mentions the idea that these images are ancient and contemporary. And I think she was referring to like this one, which is the falling man from 9/11, that Richard Drew photograph that was reproduced so extensively. So anyway, there's one thing I discovered is there's a small corner of research about falling, which talks about how people who fall on great distances don't feel fear, but they actually feel elated as they're falling, even though, well, and like, maybe we don't need to be on this one for so long because it's so terrible. Even though the outcome of the fall is really going to be grave, people don't apparently get scared when they're falling, which is, you know, really interesting. And so the other thing is that I think is interesting is that, you know, when you do something that you have some idea what it might mean, but then afterwards, it turns out that you discover that there may be a lot different ways to think about the meanings of the work. And in this case, I started realizing that this could be seen as a metaphor for the falling of art history, the falling of the canon of art history, and the falling of the characters who were, the bad actors who, through the Me Too movement, have been discovered were predators or whatever they were doing, and are no longer, viewed like in the same way. Chuck Close or Nicholas Nixon, these artists who were very well known and revered are now seen as, they're not, they're kind of taken off the list in a way of, they're not going to get shows, and they've fallen out of favor. This is John Lennon, Vin Diesel Hoffman picture. So anyway, so the other thing I thought of is it's an idea of like, mortality and falling, which is, I'm now 71 years old, so it just makes sense that I'm subconsciously thinking about falling. I'm thinking about, my fact that I still have the sense of immortality that I had when I was 20, but I also am wise enough to feel that that's rather silly. So that's, I think, another layer of meaning about falling. And then also the falling of my career, as the styles have changed and people become more interested in diversity and artists from different backgrounds or different sexual preferences, etc. That here I am, an old white guy, making work about art that was commissioned by the plunderers of colonialism. Like, I'm like really out of touch with. I'm really fallen out of favor in a sense. Although in recently I've actually been doing really well, and mostly in Europe, which is interesting. And I had done an interview a couple of years ago, and I talked about how I'd heard this thing about Sidney Bechet, the jazz musician who was very traditional, and he had found that he was kind of no longer as popular as he had been, and he went to Europe, and he had a great second career. It was really popular because they were really into traditional jazz in Paris. And oddly, I kind of had the same thing happening with me, is that I had some work in a History of Blur show. They used my image for the poster at the Musée d'Orsay in Lausanne last year. And then I have the meeting with the Pope, and I just did a big project for the Palau de la Música de Catalan in Barcelona, doing their program. They used 25 of my images, and I'm going to have a show there in Barcelona in the fall. So, so oddly, this kind of falling idea kind of resonates with the idea of falling and then maybe rising again in a different incarnation.
And that's interesting, because I like to talk about that for a second. And do you think that has a lot to do with, in perspective, the United States is still super young, like as a country and as an idea and everything. And the European countries have been around for so long. Do you think there's just, even like conceptually, there's still an understanding in Europe that this is like a much broader kind of timeline than how we think of it here in the United States, and that's kind of how they are more open to, a broader understanding of what art is, or even, trying to get away from the diversity part of it, but just like that there's a much broader landscape of artwork than kind of the pigeonhole that we sometimes stick ourselves in here in the United States, with the way contemporary art is kind of moving to this more, diversity focused kind of idea.
Well, I don't know. I think the US is way ahead in human rights issues in general, and that we also have maybe a worse history of abuses of, particularly with slavery than Europe. So I think we're in the forefront, and I think, it's all started here. And that, Europe's come along with it too, but it's not as central an issue, I don't think.
It just seems there's like more material to reflect on, like other like ideas there's more there with Europe. And they've been through so many different kinds of phases and modes that, I don't dismiss the idea of like focusing more on human rights and diversity. I just think that there's so much history there, and we have this kind of tiny history. I mean, I know we're connected to all of it in some way, but when you focus on it specifically as a country, it's in the Western kind of idea that the United States brings with it. It just seems like such a tinier. There's less depth, I think, in some ways to what we're doing but when you go to another country that's been, around for centuries, multiple centuries, like there seems to be a little more understanding to
Right.
all, like many, many more aspects than simply just the ones that we focus here on in the United States, which, I positive and negative, you know what I mean?
Well, I don't think I can generalize too much just from the fact that I've had a couple of successes lately on, on European culture. I don't really feel that educated about what's going on in Europe. So,
Well,
but
even in the museum industry, there's been some conversation on the idea of connoisseurship and things like that. That there's less connoisseurship in the United States than there is in Europe. People understand what they're looking at a little better in Europe than they do in the United States, as far as in a museum environment. Is what's been shared with me to some degree.
anyway, interesting food for thought.
Yeah, we'll just leave it at
So
that.
that's that's kind of where I am with the Falling Through History, which I haven't had the opportunity to show it yet, unfortunately, and maybe someday. Then I have a couple other things. I mean, it seemed like I don't know how long this is supposed to go on for, but I do have a couple other projects I've been working on.
Yeah, let's see them.
Let's see. Well, I did a project. Sorry. Oh, I'm not on share screen anymore, am I?
Yeah, I still see it. Yep.
Okay. I did a project called Unspoken, where I did these pairs of people who were kind of separated in the frame and looking away from each other. And there was obviously some kind of body language and positioning were able to create a story, a narrative that the words, so it could remain unspoken with words, but the picture tells the story. And some of them have a voyeur. But anyway, these seem to be kind of personally. Again, I didn't know until afterwards that this was just in the period where I was getting separated and eventually divorced, and seems like they these kind of relate to that struggle in my own world. That these characters are not really, they're like this one, for instance. This is maybe it's a sad guy, maybe me. But anyway, now I've been divorced 5 years, and I had a show last summer at Dolby Chadwick Gallery in San Francisco. And let me get bigger. The images are the same series, but now the images are more connected and more engaged with each other and less going away from each other. And I think that reflects my current world, where I now have I'm in a new relationship, which is good. So I think there's, it's an example of a somewhat subconscious personal history being played out in the imagery. Just last year, I did a series which I call Darshan, which is another non-representational series, a kind of bookending the mandala series that I guess I have to show that first. Oh, come on, get back there. Oops, sorry about that. So I've been making these mandala images. I've made many in different time periods over the last 25 years. Those are 2016, I think. And then these are earlier, and then I did some even much earlier. So I wanted to do something square for a long time, but I never really figured out how to do it without it being too close to Joseph Albers. I thought that was a problem. But this series, I think, is working for me. And again, it's no longer blur, but it's camera movement, which is creating the kind of distortion and the kind of weird, maybe disturbing, visually disturbing kind of pulsing. And the idea is that there's, darshan is an idea of gazing upon a sacred object. And sometimes if the sacred object is live, that you receive a blessing in return. So some of these have like eyes in them, as if you're getting a blessing from it in return for your attention. So I'm pretty, I'm happy with this series. I think it works. And that's last year. So that brings me fairly up to date.
Yeah.
I've been doing I'm working on a monograph now, and I've been spending a lot of time on that. And then I worked on this Palau project this winter. But I started doing something about swimmers, where there's a picture of a very small, tiny swimmer way out in the water in like a huge expanse. And I think it's kind of a good, reasonable idea. And but I'm not going to show you any images of those yet. I have to wait for our third interview.
That's right. Cool. Well, that's great. It's great catching up. And I'm, excited to hear more about, potentially having this you attending this conference and just what's going on with the rest of your work. And hopefully we'll see some more of it here. But I guess we can just end on if you have any like final thoughts on this, and then until we meet again.
No, I don't. I mean, I think that really I've said a lot more than I thought I would. We've gone a lot of different directions. I'm ready to go have lunch.
That sounds good.
But and thank you. I really want to thank you so much for your time and interest.